Good. So then a very warm welcome to all of you here in the room, in the Commission building, and to all of you who are watching also this in a live stream in the institutions, but also other kind of in a broader setting. So very welcome to this Connect University. My name is Lutz Güllner. I'm the head of the strategic communications team in the External Action Service, and will soon say a few things about what we are doing there. This is part of the Connect University. For those of you who don't know what Connect University is, it is actually an initiative by the Director General Connect in the European Commission, really aimed at informing about latest digital trends, about opportunities, about challenges, discussing issues of relevance, and that's why also in the framework of this Connect University, we have a series of discussions on disinformation and related issues, information space also, how do we deal with this, what are changes, what are challenges, what are risks, and what do we do with this. And I'm very, very happy and pleased to have a great panel here today with four excellent speakers on a very specific issue, which is tackling online disinformation. Of course, a lot of the online disinformation has been in discussion for quite some time already, and I will not bore you with kind of lengthy introductions. I think we first all got very a clear insight of the risks of the issues around it at the latest at the US elections, when it was, let's say, well known to a broader public. But online disinformation and disinformation as such has been around for a long time already, long before even the digital space was developed and the internet invented. And what we want to do today is to look a little bit at the broader picture about the, let's say, the latest developments in this field. What are the risks? What are threats? How do we recognize them? What are problems also in discussing this issue? And for that, as I said, four excellent people that I will introduce to you in a second. The European Commission has issued yesterday a whole package of policy papers on a new digital strategy. And you won't be surprised that the issue of disinformation, how do we deal with platforms, what are also the responsibilities maybe of platforms, is mentioned in this package. This package is a bit the starting gun for quite a number of initiatives that are now on the agenda for this Commission in the next few months. And one focus will also be on this area. How do we deal with disinformation, misinformation, with the manipulation of the information space? The most important issue that we should keep in mind is when we talk about disinformation is what are we talking about, actually? Because there is quite some confusion also in the public debate what the term actually implies. And a lot of people are still using the term fake news. There's the term junk news, there's the term misinformation, disinformation. And the issue that we want to look at today here in our discussion is one part of this universe, a very important one, and also one part where we have done quite some work also in policy terms. And that is the disinformation that has been created very intentionally, that is also spread and distributed in a coordinated way, and that clearly has a at least potentially harmful impact. We also see this disinformation often spread, let's say, in covert ways, so it's not very visible where it comes from. It is multiplying in different areas, and we also have some new trends in this cluster that some of these activities also have call it coercive nature, in the sense that they try to influence debates, that people are squeezed out of debates, or that certain debates are being prevented from happening. This is a little bit the mindset that we would like to look at today. So disinformation defined as the intentional, manipulative interference in an information space that can be because of external actors or internal actors. And I think exactly the last point is who are the actors will also keep a focus on this discussion that we have. Last point from me is to tell you that we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper here in terms of policy and in terms of activities, also from a perspective of the European institutions. I will not kind of go through all the instruments, but I think the instrument that is maybe the most noteworthy that we have developed between the European institutions is the so-called Action Plan Against Disinformation from December 2018, which has been developed also with the perspective of the European elections that happened in May 2019. It was the first time that a government, or at least at the European level, that we have defined a very holistic approach, a multi-angle approach, bringing together very different aspects of this multifaceted challenge that we want to look at. And I'm just mentioning it, and will not explain it in further detail, but that we say 4 things are important when we deal with this information. The first one is we need to understand the issue well. We need to be able to analyze it, also to expose it, to show people what it is that we see, that this is not just kind of an academic work. The second point is we need to work much closer together, because each and every member state, even internationally, is confronted with this issue, and there's a lot of insights, a lot of experience also to be shared. Third one is, of course, the big elephant in the room that we'll maybe also discuss today, but which will be a subject of discussion in Brussels here for the next few months, is the question of whether there should be rules or maybe even regulations for the actors, in particular the platforms. And the last one we should definitely not forget, because it's a key element, is how do we deal with this issue also in our media policy? How do we deal with this in terms of raising awareness? Do we need to invest maybe also in educational policies a little bit more? So with these kind of introductory remarks, I'm extremely happy to have the 4 panelists. I will start with Päivi Tampere, who is the head of the communications of the Hybrid Center of Excellence. And rather than reading out, Päivi, your CV that a lot of you have seen online, maybe you want to kick off with 2 or 3 sentences about yourself and what brought you to study this issue.
Thank you, Lutz Güllner, and it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me to be a panelist. What brought me into this topic? I have my first part of my working career I spent in academia, so I was writing my PhD dissertation on social media and authority civilian relationship during crisis. So what happens when there is a crisis outbreaking? What happens in social media? What kind of questions citizens are asking and also expecting authorities to answer or react? So that was the first step, and then I spent some years in government, working actually in Estonia, working for the Prime Minister office there, and one area I was mainly working on was counter information influencing activities. And then now almost 2 years at the Hybrid COE in Helsinki. So that is in a nutshell why I'm here today.
Good. Then I would suggest we listen to you. Sorry, I need to put on the micro. Then I suggest we listen to your presentation. I would then introduce the other panelists au fur et à mesure. Otherwise, the moment that you get the moment to speak, maybe people might have forgotten again. But Päivi, why don't you start sharing your thoughts, and then we go to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. So I was asked to kind of give a short introduction on hybrid COE work and how disinformation and hybrid threats are related with each other. Hybrid COE was established 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago actually. We have been active since October 2017, and it's the international independent organization located in Helsinki. We have a rather small secretariat there, 30 people working currently, but we have 27 member states. So EU and NATO member states can join the center. And our role is to is to build member state capabilities to counter hybrid threats, and also to have a constant dialogue with the EU, different bodies, and then NATO as well. So the hybrid COE has, we haven't defined what hybrid threats are. Why we haven't done it is that once it's being said that once you define hybrid threats, then they are not hybrid anymore, since there is the element of surprise, what is an essential part of a hostile actor. So hostile actors want to plan their operations in a way which comes to the counterpart as a surprise. So instead of defining hybrid threats, we use this following characterization. So we understand hybrid threats as coordinated and synchronized hostile activities. And those activities are targeting our democratic values, so the cornerstones of our societies or the institutions, such as rule of law, free media, freedom of expression, free economy. And today, since we are addressing the problem or challenge of disinformation here, the freedom of expression is the core value what hostile actors want to challenge or undermine. Since our societies are open and people are, it's part of a really important part of democracy that people have freedom to express their opinion, participate in different kind of debates, then it's relatively easy to wedge interfere that discussion from outside, since it's public and open. What the aim of the hostile activities are, the aim is to influence decision making, either at the local or regional level, state or institutional level, so that the target country or target institution or target organization would make decisions which would then harm itself. So the end goal is to undermine and hurt the target. And how these activities are organized, we are speaking about two important thresholds. First, there is the threshold of detection. So hostile actor would like to orchestrate or synchronize those activities in a way that they would be undetected, so that nobody would kind of connect the dots what is going on in a society or in a certain kind of context. And if detection doesn't happen, then response is also non-existent. If then the activities can be detected, so somebody is kind of drawing the bigger picture, making situational analysis, then the second threshold we are speaking about is threshold of attribution, so that the activities would be orchestrated in a way that nobody is able to address or attribute them to one particular actor or state or non-state actor. So attribution is a key question we are kind of also struggling when speaking about disinformation. So how to attribute? Who is behind the disinformation activities? Can we say for sure? Can we even have waterproof evidence? What is enough credible evidence or a big amount of evidence that we can say that, okay, this actor is behind these disinformation operations, for example. So here we have a modus operandi of an hostile actor. So this is hybrid COE has been cooperating with the Joint Research Centre at the European Commission for over a year now, and as a result, there is a conceptual model of hybrid threats, and this picture you see on the slide is a small part of it. So here you can see when speaking about hybrid threats, it's not only about military, so-called hard security threat. It also, it's an overarching threat covering many different domains within societies. So diplomacy, culture, legal space, infrastructure, intelligence, and of course information, to mention a few. So the adversary wants to select tools in order to achieve those objectives, and the tools chosen are those where the adversary is kind of evaluating that, okay, the target country's most vulnerable parts or most vulnerable domains are these. For example, diplomacy, cyber, and information. And after mapping the vulnerabilities, then targeting those domains and trying to kind of reach the goal. So vulnerability mapping is an essential part of planning a hybrid campaign. But then when you choose different domains, then in order the activities to be hybrid, more than one domain has to be targeted. So if I, for example, would establish with my friends a group and make Facebook pages, Twitter accounts, and try to start spreading disinformation on, for example, vaccinations, that wouldn't be hybrid threat or hybrid activities. So the actor has to target multiple domains within the society or within the institution in order to it become hybrid. So here you can see that, for example, you can combine political, diplomacy, cyber. So you can organize cyber attacks. You can then have political pressuring, blackmailing. You can use diplomatic tools to affect the target. Or then you can use a combination of information, intelligence, economic tools, or infrastructure. You can try to buy, for example, companies managing telecommunications, water supplies, electricity, power plants, so on and so forth. Try to get the leverage in a target country. And these effects can cause cascading effects across the domains, and that is also what makes the analysis challenging, since it's not only one topic or one domain you should take a look at, but multiple instead. So if we take a look at disinformation, so disinformation or information influencing activities is only one tool in a toolbox. So if we take a look at the hybrid adversary, then disinformation is only one tool, but it's relatively easy and cheap tool. So that's why it's used so much. And it's also important, like stated already before, it's really important to make a difference. What kind of disinformation activities are really a threat to national security and what not? So it's really important to distinguish coordinated hostile activities from harmless noise. The hybrid CO is one of our working methods is to organize different kind of exercises to policy practitioners and also, in some cases, to private sector experts. And one experience we have received from those exercises is that it's really challenging to actually get the situational picture so clear that you are able to make the distinction. What kind of actions we should react? What are the so serious activities that they should be responded, and what should be just left without any attention? So that is really challenging question. But overall, we can see that everything what information influencing activities which leads to erosion of trust, to confusion, or increased polarization between different minorities or groups. Those are activities which should be somehow taken seriously and also need response. The second big question what comes to disinformation is to make a difference what is external hostile activities, so orchestrated by a non-state or state actor outside from the borders, and what is 100% domestic. And that is, I think, a kind of growing challenge, because I would say, this is now my personal opinion, but following the discussion and following social media, quite big part of this information is actually of domestic origin. Different kind of groupings, activists are spreading this information, and they don't have anything to do with external actors. So how do we respond to domestic disinformation, especially if it's exactly trying to undermine public debate, for example, trust to institutions, decision-making, authorities, or even attacking, for example, journalists, researchers who are scrutinizing these topics. So a couple of ideas or preconditions for effective response. So shared situational awareness. So when we speak about hybrid, so it's not only communication experts or strategic communication practitioners who should be aware of what is going on, but the shared situational awareness should cover different domains, different policy areas. Cross-governmental cooperation or cross-institutional cooperation is crucial, has a crucial role here. One practical thing, I think the experts here later on will speak more about OSINT, so open source intelligence, but use of open source intelligence is one tool to sanitize information. OSINT can be shared horizontally, at least more easily, and also with private sectors or private sector partners. So that can be one tool to kind of improve wide situational awareness. Then, well, cross-governmental cooperation or institutional, so that you would know people with whom you should plan response. It has a crucial importance. And then public-private partnership. And that leads us to a more proactive response. So if we are not able in a larger scale to step out from the reactive mode, that we monitor and we react when something happens, into a more proactive response, then I dare to say that we are lacking, or we are not receiving or getting that so effective response we could if we would have more proactive approach. But of course, it's a challenge and needs constant work to reach that situation. And now I reserved some time for quick questions right after the presentation, and then of course later on I'm happy to answer all the questions and comments.
Thank you, Päivi. Indeed, we would like to have the opportunity, or to give you the possibility, to right away after the presentations also ask about specific things, in particular if something needs to be clarified. Otherwise, of course, after all the presentations that we heard here from the panel, we want to have ample time to discuss also with you here. Are there any questions to Päivi now on what she presented in terms of approaches? I think you kind of ticked a number of very, very important issues like attribution, which is a huge issue. Where does this come from? How do we detect it? You said separate harmless noise from coordinated hostile activities. Sounds very easy, but if you deal with this on a day-to-day basis, like my team and Raimunda will speak in a moment about this, is quite a challenge as well. And then, of course, let's say the difference between external actors and internal actors. How do we deal with this? Are there any questions now to Päivi? No? Good. Then I would like to move on to my right. Raimunda, you, I actually know who she is because she is working in my team. I will nevertheless introduce you with a few words and will then ask you to present yourself a little bit. Raimunda Miglinaite, who's working in the External Action Services strategic communications team, in particular in a team that has been set up in 2015, which is called the East Stratcom Task Force. Tell us a little bit about what is the East Stratcom Task Force, and about yourself, of course.
Sure. Thank you very much, Lutz. actually wanted to start my presentation from telling about the team, because it has some specificities. So I joined the team a little over a year ago, and this is a team that was established in 2015 by the decision of the European Council, when the European heads of state and government gave us a very specific mandate to challenge Russia's ongoing disinformation campaigns. So we have a very clear focus on what's the actor that we're looking. So we've been given that mandate, and we have been trying to do it since. Shall I just continue? Or yeah? Okay, thank you. I want you to think back a little bit to the political context and international context back in 2015. The decision was made in March. So if you think back to then, this is in the context of almost a year after the illegal annexation of Crimea. This is in terms of in the context of ongoing armed aggression in the East Ukraine. This is 8 months after the downing of the Malaysian flight MH17. So all the events that were often preceded but also followed by extensive pro-Kremlin disinformation campaigns. And by that time, in March 2015, it's abundantly clear that disinformation is in fact a challenge. It's a challenge for Europe, it's a challenge for our European democracies, and possibly for the security. So the heads of state and government, is this working? Established the team. Yeah. They give us the mandate, and of course they tell us that we have to do this, but the heads of state naturally don't tell us how we should be doing it. And so this was a question: what is a legitimate and an effective way for us as a EU institution to address this challenge? And just to briefly describe what we're doing within a broader context of our strategic communications team, our work is concentrated on 3 main strands, which correspond to 3 lines of thinking of how one addresses the challenge of disinformation. And as Päivi mentioned, the proactive part is quite important. So one part of our work is focused on helping the EU delegations, especially in the Eastern neighborhood, so Eastern Partnership countries, to communicate about the EU policies more effectively. The thinking beyond that is that people are rational creatures. We are able to tell truth from fiction. So if correct, objective, accurate information is out there, people will be able to use it. And so we're trying to help the EU delegations to communicate about EU more effectively. The second line of thinking is that, well, we try to do our work as best as we can, but actually it's the journalists that are the first and probably the ultimate line of defense when dealing with disinformation challenge. So it's crucial to have a strong media environment. So we're working with the colleagues from the European Commission to try to strengthen media environment, especially in Europe's eastern neighborhood. And finally, the third strand of our work, and this is probably what we're most known for under the EU versus Disinfo, we expose and analyze and respond to pro-Kremlin disinformation. So we try to track disinformation campaigns in various pro-Kremlin media outlets. We collect specific examples of disinformation cases and put them in publicly available database. So since 2015, we've collected over 7,500 cases, which allows us to see over time how message by message, bit by bit, these disinformation campaigns unfold, who they target, how they're spin, how the narratives are constructed, and it's, as I said, all publicly available. So the team was established in 2015, but we're here now in 2020. And obviously, this is a field where developments happen quite quickly, and there's been quite a bit of an evolution. So if this is not a first time you're hearing about disinformation, you've probably noticed that now we more and more often talk about multiple disinformation actors. And again, I turn to Päivi. You mentioned, there's domestic actors, there's foreign actors, there's different states. We're not only talking about Russia anymore. We're noticing, of course, also something that our colleagues from NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence called globalization of disinformation. And I will allow myself to quote them. when they say that today it is possible to hire a Nigerian company who uses Russian software and the content produced in Philippines to attack a politician in Germany. So we've seen a lot of sort of also private efforts to gain some profit from the disinformation environment. We, of course, see the emergence of new platforms where these campaigns can unfold. So it's no longer only Twitter and Facebook, and we've seen new techniques. If in 2016, especially when we look back, we noticed the presence of bots, for example, that would manipulate conversations. So now there's apparent strive for authenticity of the disinformation actors, right? We talk perhaps more about cyborgs, so humans behind certain attacks, and so on and so forth. But the point that I would like to make today is that while there are indeed new means, new actors, and new techniques, the good old offline methods are still applied, and they still work. So disinformation is still in the pro-Kremlin hybrid toolkit, and television and what we would call a traditional media is still playing quite a significant part in it. So I would try to focus on that for a little bit. Let me give you some numbers, and numbers that relate to money. So Russia spends around 1.3 billion euros annually on official media outlets, which involve federal TV channels. Now, of course, this money is distributed to lots of activities, but disinformation definitely takes quite a lot of airspace on Russian federal channels. And this funding, as we have observed, is increasing. It's a roughly 30% increase in the past few years. So has the funding for the RT and Россия Сегодня increased. It's around 325 million euros annually. Just to remind you, you probably heard of RT and Sputnik. So RT operates in 100 countries. Sputnik is available in 33 languages. And the gentleman you see at the bottom of the slide, Dmitry Kiselov, so he is someone who appears every week on Russian TV as a political commentator. But more importantly, he is sanctioned by the EU as a central figure of government propaganda, supporting the deployment of Russian forces in Ukraine, because he is also not just a TV commentator, he's also a CEO of the Россия Сегодня, which is a Russian state media giant that controls Sputnik, RIA Novosti agency, and some other outlets. Now, again, I hope that by 2020, you've heard of RT in the sense of the challenges that it might be posing, and you know what it is about. But I would like to nevertheless sort of underline three things that you should be mindful and remember about Sputnik and RT. First, they are not independent media. So Sputnik was created by presidential decree with the aim of reporting on the state policy of Russia abroad. RT is in the official list of core organizations of strategic importance to Russia. They use disinformation to promote political objectives. Now, independent media watchdog in the UK, the Ofcom, has in over a dozen of cases criticized RT for many problems, among them materially misleading output. Last year in July, RT was fined £200,000 for serious failures to comply with broadcasting rules. And these rules, namely, require broadcasted news to be presented with due impartiality. So there was obviously a lack of that. RT is known as an instrument to create a smokescreen of disinformation that is important for the Kremlin when it seeks to cover up the facts about events like the downing of the MH17, poisoning of Sergei Skripal, and many others. And just to build on a little bit on what Päivi said, the goal is to confuse, to dismay, to distract, and to delay or actually prevent a political response. Because if one is confused about what is happening, how can we decide on our actions? And I would say more insidiously, it's to convince that such thing as objective facts and truth does not exist, because everything is just an opinion, right? You have 5 experts offering competing conspiracy theories about what might have happened to the flight MH17, and so in the end, the viewer is presumably just confused and thinks that, the truth cannot be known. And finally, they do not seek to be impartial. Dmitry Kyselov, the gentleman you saw in the previous slide, reportedly has told the employees of RIA Novosti in 2013 that the period of impartial journalism is over. Objectivity is a myth, and it has been imposed on us. So they do not strive for impartiality. And more importantly, the management of both RT and Sputnik and Russian federal TV channels receive weekly instructions from the Kremlin about what has to be covered, what topics are to be avoided, and how and why. Now, how do we know about this? We know about this from the Russian independent journalists and from whistleblowers who had shared their accounts with other outlets and had sort of, let us glimpse into what actually is happening. So from these whistleblowers, we know about these meetings and that go to even such a detail where a certain vocabulary is introduced. I don't know if you watched any of RT's footage, for example, about Ukraine in the past years, especially previous authorities of Ukraine were described not as government, but as a junta, which kind of shapes, of course, a particular worldview. Now, one could theoretically think that disinformation narratives appear simultaneously and that they somehow reflect the thinking of Russian leadership, of Russian editors, or Russian journalists. But in fact, the existence of these weekly meetings, of guidelines of how things should be covered, kind of proves that there is a very controlled media system with a top-down, if you will, approach where these narratives are constructed. And again, we know from the whistleblowers that people who work in these media institutions, they face social or peer pressure or financial pressure to comply with these guidelines, and so the system kind of perpetuates itself. Sometimes such a controlled approach really leads to quite a hilarious consequences, and as we observe and follow the Russian sources, we notice them from time to time. Let me show you one of the examples. This is actually from back in 2011, when the Russian state TV channel, Rossiya 24, reported on parliamentary election results, which were in fact contested by many Russians to the extent that they took to the streets. And so they were announcing election results in one of the Russian regions, Rostov-on-Don. And if you would look at the blue column and add all the percentages, you would see that the overall number of people's support for political parties is 146%. No, so that's 2011, and years later, there was a whistleblower, a former cameraman who used to work in this TV station, who shared his account with journalists of Radio Free Europe, and the way he described the situation is that the editors of the program got an instruction to show a particular percentage to the pro-Kremlin party United Russia, which is first there in the column. And they got the figure that was supposed to be displayed. And when the editor asked, so what are the other figures? How should we display them? They were just told, just write whatever they got. And so the editors did. And this is how you get 146%. There's been similar blunders as well, like the time when other Russian TV stations showed graphic images from a video game telling that this was a battlefield in Syria. Where there's instances where Russian TV anchors start laughing, for example, at the narratives that they're suggesting. So these kind of absurd examples, but of course they should not distract us from the fact that Russian journalists are really facing censorship. Independent journalists really face censorship. If they step out of line, they risk losing their jobs. And of course, there's also been cases of detention, and they sometimes even are at the physical peril. So it's not an easy environment by all means to work with, but it's a very important job that independent Russian journalists do, because they really allow us to glimpse of what is happening and kind of counter that threat. So all of this is to say that there is a coordination at the very high political level in creating disinformation narratives. And rightly, we do tend to focus a lot on the online disinformation. But I think an important thing here is to remember that quite a lot of narratives that we observed in the online space come from offline. They're created in these political meetings, and that I think is important to keep in mind. I would like to show you now. So I've talked about Russian TV. I would actually like to show you what they are talking about, because if you don't watch federal Russian TV channels, you might not know. But this is something that we do. We try to raise awareness and highlight. And so if we can watch a short video clip, this was made in December 2019.
Я не думаю, что главная проблема России...
Oh, no. It worked. Maybe just one more time? No? Okay. Okay. Well, perhaps later we'll just continue. Yeah. But I mean, you would hear, for example, in this video that we made, you would hear, for example, that U.S. special services were behind the terrorist attack in New Zealand that happened last year, you may remember. You would hear that Greta Thunberg is a new prophet of a new totalitarian wave. You would hear that that Soviet occupation of Estonia never happened, that Poland started World War II, that Dutch and Australian authorities are hiding crucial evidence about the MH17 crash. So all these narratives are kind of hammered down day after day for the audiences. Now you might ask yourselves a question here. Why would you care? Why would you care if someone in Vladivostok sees day after day that Greta Thunberg is a threat to to the traditional society or whatnot? But in fact, it is not just a Russian problem. It is also a political problem. For example, when Gazprom-run TV station NTV shows a documentary which basically suggests that Western diplomats are the puppet masters of Russian civil society, it of course affects the work of EU diplomats in Russia and other countries. And these narratives, of course, penetrate also the public sphere here in Europe, and they kind of seep here as well. And they're, of course, targeted to the audiences to exploit our vulnerabilities, right? We might maybe not care so much about protests in Russia, but then you have these narratives that, for example, Germany and France use migration as a weapon to weaken Italy, or that European Parliament is rewriting history, or that the NATO exercises are Russophobic. So the idea is to exploit vulnerabilities and to turn us against each other and against our democratic institutions. And let me finish with another example. You might think, okay, I do not watch Russian TV. I know about RT and Sputnik, so I'm kind of safe, which is fair enough. But we've also seen, and I think my colleagues will continue talking about it, there's the challenges when
Я не думаю, что главная проблема России – это украинские шпионы.
Службы Соединенных Штатов Америки, которые стояли за этим терактом. Просто так вот такое совершить невозможно.
Больная девочка, одинаковым образом предельно глупая и предельно искренняя, идеальный пророк новой тоталитарной волны.
Мы неоднократно повторяли, что нет и не было никакой советской оккупации Эстонии.
Польша, надо раз навсегда во всех учебниках истории написать. Польша – организатор Второй мировой войны и главный виновник.
И представители Австралии и Голландии участвовали в искусственном конструировании дела. преступление, проливающее свет на особенности следствия по Боингу и на то, сколь далеко готовы пойти Голландия и Австралия в этой истории вместе с Украиной.
Арестом Ассанжа можно сказать, что на сегодняшний день Россия и русские журналисты действительно самое главное поборники, которые отстаивают свободу слова, журналистскую профессию.
That was the TV. Can we go back to presentation, please? But there's also another challenge is when disinformation actor tries to disguise who they are. And we have seen, for example, that RT, it changed its name from Russia Today to RT to make it kind of shorter and less visible, the link to Russia. But it also has a number of spin-off projects, so to say, which look like your normal, and I'm sorry here for a moniker, millennial media, which is flashy and fun. So, for example, there's this thing called In the Now, and you would, if you scroll, you would see all these cute posts about, you know, kitties with prosthetics. But then another post that you would see is this lady who's not Russian, she's probably English native speaker, who is basically criticizing the paid school lunch situation in the US. And at some point she asks, you know, how a country that spends over $700 billion on military cannot afford, you know, lunch school for 8-year-olds. Now, while the question about the budget allocation, of course, is a legitimate question in a democracy, keep in mind that this lady is, you know, asking it from the media outlet that is affiliated with the RT, which is in fact, you know, has a very clear pro-Kremlin interest. And there's a number of examples. For example, another similar project which basically comes to the conclusion that America is an oligarchy. This is also a recent one from a similar project which takes a very clear stab at the upcoming US presidential elections. And only when you dig quite deeply in the About section, you would see that this project is a refuge of common sense, gentle mockery, highlighting hypocrisy, and via RT.com, if you're worried about that kind of thing. So my point here, yes, we should be worried. And the very, very last thing, and especially with these kind of more obscure projects, I think a lot has been said about that to deal with disinformation, we need a whole of society approach. And I think this is a very good example because In the Now at some point was suspended, their Facebook account was suspended because they did not disclose their link to RT. It now has been renewed, but they have disclosed that link. And the way it got suspended was because a German NGO wrote a report about it, to which Facebook reacted. And then Facebook has these rules which required to disclose the connection to the parent company, and there's a number of other rules thanks to the code of, and who are strengthened thanks to the code of practice. And so the point here is that you need both civil society, you need platforms, and you need governments to actually tackle this challenge holistically. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Raimunda, for the insight into a very specific actor in this field. As we said, if there are direct questions to the presentations before we come to the more general discussion, there is one.
Thank you very much, Raimunda, for your great presentation. I'm working for the chairman of the EU Military Committee. 2 questions. You said that one of the tasks you are conducting is strengthening media environment. Could you say something more about that? How do you are working with media? Are you working with media here in Brussels or in the EU? And how are they perceiving your work? Are they willing to learn from you or take your recommendations to be more careful? And the second is a more broader, but maybe you are not dealing with that, but you have, I guess, a certain opinion on that. How effective is the Russian disinformation industry? Thank you.
Yes, so for media environment, our focus is on the eastern neighborhood of Europe, so not within the EU, but countries like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and we work very, very closely with the colleagues from the European Commission, because they have a lot of programs that EU already directs into strengthening of the media environment, where we come in because we follow the disinformation question very closely. So we come in with the expertise and advising colleagues in the Commission as they tailor their programs. So it's sort of a hand-in-hand approach. How effective is the disinformation mission? That was your question. That is a big question. That is a very big question, because how do we measure an impact? And that's a methodological question. That's a conceptual question. Of course, discounting the fact that there is a foreign actor that aims to interfere into our societies, which by itself is saying a lot. We have, scattered evidence here and there. Basically, for example, one of the most recurring narratives directed at Eastern Partnership countries is that there's a lab in Georgia, which in fact is a public health research lab, but the pro-Kremlin media has been saying for years that this is American military lab that produces biological weapons and infects people, and so on and so forth. And I think NDI did a poll a year ago, and found that 20% of Georgians believe that this lab contributes to the spread of epidemics. We've no examples also from other organizations about fake Twitter and Facebook accounts actually inviting people to rallies and organizing these rallies. So this shows that they can have an actual impact on the ground. But the challenge still remains for us, of course, how we measure it. So.
Good. It's a big question that we might come back also at our kind of general discussion about the impact of this. I'd like to turn to Ruben now. Ruben Arcos Martin, you're a lecturer at the Rey Juan Carlos University, and you set up the Intel Hub. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing exactly and what are the issues that you're focusing on, and then of course your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, hello. Thanks so much for the opportunity of being here and sharing some thoughts. I'm from Rey Juan Carlos University in Madrid. I'm working in a department of communication science and sociology, but also my other research interest has to do with intelligence studies and intelligence analysis. And of course, a part of intelligence activities have to do with influence, some call them active measures, overaction. And I think that everything related to disinformation has, is linked there somehow as well. And Intel Hub is it is a network for the study of intelligence, an initiative organized with American Military University and the University of Leicester, together with King Juan Carlos University. So that's my main focus of activity in the academia. Yeah, and I would like to share with you some thoughts on how the digital communication environment enables particular active measure or cover influence activities, and also how we might be seeing a kind of democratization of the production of content. Might be information, but it might be also disinformation, and also how can domestic actors, maybe was speaking about that before, or external actors can use that for their influence activities. So the internet and social media have remarkable advantages, but they also provide this channel for conducting deception activities. If we look at that from the perspective of intelligence services or the military, we might speak about deception activities, distraction, and maybe, because you want the target to delay their decision-making processes. But you also have disinformation that can affect our electoral processes, our democratic processes, harming our confidence in the institutions, divide our societies. And audiovisual content is there. And now with deepfake technology, deep learning, artificial intelligence, I think that in the horizon, we might be seeing the emergence of a potential threat to our societies, and we should be concerned about somehow. One of the features of, let's say, these audiovisual forgeries, during the times of the Soviet Union, there was this idea of the use of forgeries for influencing other countries, actors, compromising relationships, and so on. But we might speak about audiovisual forgeries when we speak about deepfakes, if they are used for that purpose. One of the features of the visual elements is that they are more likely to be recognized and recalled by the target audiences. So if we put some images, it is very likely that that content will be more, will be remembered than if it just have text. So that is one potential thing to think about. This can be used in activities making use of bots, fake personas on Twitter, for example, and other social media channels. So the visual disinformation might present in the future a bigger problem than simple text-based disinformation. These deepfake forgeries might trigger strong emotions in target audiences, and even if source reliability and credibility is posteriorly checked, the audiovisual content is likely to be remembered, and it will be difficult to get rid of the visual information that we have been exposed to. So that is the thing. Maybe we later discover that is, an influence activity, a malign influence activity, or we debunk or whatever. But the effect that we have in our minds, because we are going to remember the videos or the images, is something to be concerned about from my perspective. And this deepfake technology is really improving. I am thinking in a website which is called "This person does not exist." That really shows you the kind of things that the state of the technology right now. And the earlier version of the style gun was somehow they have some problems, and there were some clues to detect that those images were not authentic; they were false. But right now, the state of the technology has improved so much that it is becoming more and more difficult to recognize, which is the real face. So this is another point. And they have shown examples as well with cats and even with articles generated with this kind of technology, just picking the headlines from different news feed and then fabricating an article made of, just with automation and artificial intelligence. So this is something that we need to be concerned as well. But at the same time, I think that the AI technology might have also some advantages and might be the only way that we can detect the false videos or images or sounds in the future. So we have the two sides of the coin, and we need to think about that. This is not, the manipulation of images or videos is not new. We already have, Adobe Photoshops and Premiere and other kinds of softwares that allow you to do your narratives for the good, to create stories, to entertain people. But the fake is like a kind of, the flipping the coin of this. It's like, okay, so how we use this, in a malicious way, and what might be the results. So particularly with this technology democratizes, and more people is able to generate content, what is called generative media, sounds, images, text. So all that field of generative media, I think it's an important niche to think about and to do research. Also, social media, we can put this content in social media, and social media can have an agenda-setting effect as well, affecting the perceptions of the publics on which are the most important issues. So, and these new communication channels allow that non-traditional actors in the media environment can disseminate content of different quality and intent to audiences worldwide and influence their perception on the importance of particular issues, public policy issues, for example. So while this might have positive implications, they also open the door for information influencing campaigns that can be conducted through different, strategies and tactics like fake identities, sites, bots, and so on. So, for example, I'm thinking in, how about a false image of a person being generated and using that image for creating the idea that, for example, a Twitter account and a profile with that person, and maybe that person can reach you out in the, through other channels, maybe doing some digital human activities. So these are the kind of things that we need to be concerned. Some of this is, have some, this is like an adaptation of all practices. For example, the theory and practice of reflexive control that was developed in the USSR, you understand that, you can influence the decision-making by, feeding information, transmitting information. That information might be false, and we will be speaking about disinformation, but that information might be true or a mixture of, false and true. And through that way, you can manipulate the perceptions of your audiences. The audience might be, intelligence services, decision makers. It might be the general population making decisions about who they are going to vote in the next elections, or if they are going to support a particular party that defends, or they are negationists about the climate change and stuff like that. So we need to be concerned about these things, but also recognize that there is a lot of stuff in the past, in history, that we can learn from. For example, activities developed by the KGB that were exposed in different intelligence committees in the 80s. For example, the use of unattributed propaganda or falsely attributed propaganda. The use of agents of influence, for example, developing media assets and then disseminating these kind of stories. So all kinds of techniques from the past that we can learn from that might be that can be adapted with the tools of the digital era. For example, these AI forgeries or press placements or other kind of techniques. For me, I think it's really important to consider that as these digital communication technologies develops and democratize, and more people is able, for example, to take pictures, take videos, do narrowcasting, in real time using different channels, for example, Facebook Live or other kinds of channels. This kind of mixture of technology, rapidness, dissemination of content might create a nightmare scenario if we are not agile dealing with this. For example, training and educating our more vulnerable populations in digital literacy skills and media literacy skills, critical thinking. This is, I think, the kind of things that we should focus on, trying to avoid that, the more vulnerable populations can get targeted by these potential activities by state and non-state actors. So cyber influence awareness, persuasive communication literacy, and critical thinking is something important. I think that one particular AI forgery of concern is the sounds, the capabilities of this technology. For example, for sampling the voice of somebody, let's say a politician or someone in the opposition or a foreign leader, and then making that, through the insertion of text by using that voice, making that person say something, make a statement that can be problematic for the relationship with other other actors, with, I think that not only videos or images, but also sounds can be really, really problematic. Or the use of, what has been called deepfake nudes, it might be false, but the effects is still there. And when you see somebody, doing certain kind of things, that might be an image difficult to get rid of. So those kind of issues. And another important area might be history, or more specifically historical memory. The idea that you can manipulate the past using these fabrications, these forgeries that look so real that it's really difficult to. So this might be, might be used in the future. So I don't want to be, too, dramatic or just presenting a nightmare idea, because AI technology is also brings a lot of advantages as well, and I think that we need to see both sides of the coin. But this is something that should make us think about potential solutions. Yeah. So I will leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben, for these elements in particular about the, let's say, the upgrading that is happening through technology. That while many of these techniques have been very old, as you said, just the means are changing enormously. You talked about vulnerability. You talked about AI. Is there any specific question to Ruben right away? I actually will use the moderator's kind of privilege to ask you. Do you see AI actually as more of as a solution to the problem, or more as a problem to the problem? Or is it just somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, right now I see...
You need to press here, otherwise.
Right now I think that it is not yet a big issue now. It is more the potential risk that this technology might entail if we are not... agile in, thinking about the potential ways in which this technology can be used. But at the same time, I really see that with this technology might bring the problem, but also the solution. I don't think that, we will be able to detect the real or the fake image unless we use that kind of technology. Or it will be really difficult for analysts to recognize if this improves and improves. So it is both sides of the coin. For example, if you are going to sample the voice of anyone, you should be that person. You should be that person, the only one that should have the right to, because otherwise, if we imagine of others sampling our voices and using it, it's really concerning.
Good. Also on this one, I talked already about the package of yesterday that came out. Of course, artificial intelligence always has two sides of the coin, and in particular is also a solution. Depends how we use it. But anyway, last but not least, Lucas Andriukaitis, you work for the DFR lab. That is very well known to the community. Before you press, otherwise you take my mic away. You will talk about digital Sherlocks. Tell us a little bit about the DFR lab as well, because not everybody here in the room and the people who listen to this presentation know what it is. And then tell us what the digital Sherlocks is exactly.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I would like to talk slightly about some of the solutions that DFR Lab has to the problem of disinformation and present you a few examples of how we deal with it. My name is Lucas Andriukaitis. I'm an associate director with the DFR Lab. I've been with the council for over 3 years. DFR Lab is part of the Atlantic Council, which is a huge think tank in the United States, dealing on all sorts of topics, region-based, and It's a pretty old think tank dealing on with a lot of topics. But what sets us out a bit, where we stand out, is that the DFR Lab deals specifically with disinformation topics. Information and disinformation, and how we approach things is also slightly different from the classical sort of think tank approach. We have teams all over the globe. On the map here, you can see some of the offices we have. We usually send a couple of researchers and set them in places like India. Now we are opening 2 offices in Africa, Latin America. Our main headquarters are in DC, and the most offices are in Europe. And actually, I'm happy to announce that the newest one is in Brussels, and we just opened one here. Me and my colleague are now permanently based in Brussels since January, and we're trying to get into disinformation topics here and consult not only on the tactics, but also on the policy side as well. So what is DFR Lab? Basically, we're interested in information, how it affects our daily lives, what impact does it have, but mostly we're interested on the disinformation side of the information, and we look at it through the scope of open source. We think that this is one of the best things to look at it, and I'll give you a few examples why. This is our motto. We say that we identify, expose, and explain disinformation using open source data. You might ask, what is open source data? And different organizations might give you slightly different answers, but the way we look at it, it's basically everything from Twitter tweets, satellite imagery, Facebook posts, anything basically you can find on Google that you can acquire legally without breaking the law, and anything that you can find on Google or any other search engine is open source according to us. There are quite a few advantages. Some of my favorite are here. It's highly accessible. Anyone who has internet can have access to the same data that DFR Lab has. Anyone can follow along the simple analysis steps that, in the way that we write our articles, is that we invite anyone who's reading it to replicate it. All of our research is replicatable. Basically, anyone, it's like a scientific experiment. If you'll do the same steps, you'll get the same results, which is nice. Information is not classified. Me coming from a military background, I served in the Lithuanian Special Forces. We used to have this problem that if we find anything from intelligence side, we cannot share with anyone because everything goes under the classified sort of stamp. With open source, everything is free. Everything we can find, we can share, and this is very nice. And with simple training, everyone can do it, and hence this is where the term digital Sherlocks come in. We say that after a few days of training that we provide, you can become a digital Sherlock yourself, and basically look for answers online yourself, and it's quite easy. This is where DFR Lab started. This report that was launched in 2015, Hiding in Plain Sight. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend to read it if you're interested in open source. Basically, when this guy was denying that Russia has any involvement in Crimea, everyone sort of knew what is going on, but no one had any proof back in 2015. So we used open source data to actually give proof, and here's an example. If you use Google Maps or any other publicly available satellite imagery, you can see these images. In 2013, on the borders of Ukraine, there was plain field, nothing, and in 2014, you can already see a fully set up military base with the tracks leading to the Russian side. So nowadays, what DFR Lab does, you can take all of our research and put into these 3 main pillars of approach: security, democracy, and technology. And I want to give you an example of each. If you're interested in learning a bit more, you can read on our Medium account. These are the names of the research pieces I'm going to briefly show you. So let's talk about democracy. We believe in DFR Lab. We believe in free and fair elections, and we try our best to keep them this way around the globe. We basically travel to different countries during election time and train journalists, work with local media partners, and we try to uncover as many information operations, fake accounts, and so on in real time. So this is an example from Mexican elections. Basically, one of the parties in Puebla was, as we noticed, supported by a large amount of fake accounts. This is a good example of a tweet that piqued our interest. As you can see, even in this screenshot, that the retweets came from Russian accounts, which is somewhat strange when we're talking about Mexican elections. So we took a deeper dive. We use these what we call social media listening tools to provide a bit more about accounts online, on Twitter, and so on. And you can see that when we analyze the information space, we notice that at least 18% of all retweets come from non-Spanish speaking countries, mostly Kazakhstan, Russia, Uzbekistan. We analyzed, and from, as you saw, from those 600 retweets, 263 accounts had a very low authority score, meaning that most likely these accounts were fake or bot accounts, if you might. Here's a few examples. As you can see, that a lot of them are in Russian names. If you look a little closer, you can find out that even the profile pictures were taken from random web pages. So basically, they're all created for a very specific purpose, to spread information. What else can you learn from these social media listening tools? You can see how much organic engagement specific hashtags or specific topics cause. And as you can see in this case, we uncovered a huge botnet which was basically working on specific hashtag amplification. And looking even a bit further, we noticed that a lot of them were commercial bots. So basically, someone who wanted bought services from these botnets, and before this task, they were promoting something in Japan. So basically, anyone who's interested can easily buy amplification. The other thing we look into is technology. We basically try to explain how technology is being used for disinformation. We are also starting to look into deepfakes bit by bit, but a lot of our work is on automation. This is an example from Armenia. So basically, we noticed that Sputnik is targeting Armenian diaspora outside of Armenia. And we uncovered that there are 4 individual users who are running a sort of network of 14 pages and 18 groups. And what is even more interesting, those guys, those 4 people are a family. It's a husband, a wife, and 2 kids accounts, which we also think that is run by the parents. And by looking into using open source data, you can easily identify where they work. You can access their LinkedIn accounts. You can see where they work. And we noticed that in all of these pages and groups, to create them, they use the same email addresses too. So to find out the whole network was relatively easily. As you can see, Rudik 2004 in Yahoo was one of the emails that they created. The pages were also interesting. For example, here you can see a travel sort of page on Facebook, which for the most would talk about travel-related issues, but every once in a while slip in some information from Sputnik or from other related sources. And here's just a few examples of these pages. As you can see, they're all managed basically by the same emails. They're all registered to the same person. And last is security. This is my bread and butter and my interest mostly. We use open source data to look into various conflict zones and to see through the fog of war, basically to find out what is actually happening. Also trace illegal activity in places like Syria, use of illegal weaponry, and so on. An example is also from Syria. Strategic services by Vegasy is one of the Russian sort of paid private military companies. You might have heard about Wagner. These are the most famous ones, but Legacy is like sort of flying under everyone's radar by doing essentially the same thing in Syria. So what we do, we use a variety of different methods, but my favorite is geolocation. Basically, what we can do if we find interesting photos. For example, here you can see someone tweeted that these private military contractors are training Liva al-Quds militia in the vicinity of Aleppo. And we want to figure out if it's actually happening, we geolocate it. And how does it look in practice? Basically, we're able to find the exact location on the map and to prove that these pictures were taken in a location that we thought. So, as you can see, we do it just like that. We find similar geographical details and prove it like this. So we proved that this private military company was active in the vicinity of Aleppo, and we also proved who they actually are. We analyzed a bunch of photos. We looked for any traces of their affiliation. We also look deeper. We look into the information they provide themselves. We saw close cooperation with another private military company, Corpus Bezopasnosti Legat, which share the same office in Cyprus. We also look into individuals themselves. So, for example, Anatoly Smolin is the director of Legacy, and he also uses very interesting recruiting techniques. He looks for members of his company in very shady websites. Anyhow, in this way, we are able to look into deeper, slightly deeper, find key individuals in these companies, and to see what they're actually up to. So I guess I would like to end on a slightly brighter, more optimistic note, saying that we believe that such thing as facts and truth and what really happened still is, and you can find it yourselves, and you can become the part of our digital Sherlock community. So thank you.
Thank you. Good. So you got 90 minutes of quite a lot of information on arguably one aspect of the big area of disinformation. And I see my colleague and friend Paolo Cesarini also here in the room. We spent a lot of time on this, look at it from very different angles. This is really the hybrid threat behind it, which is a serious issue. I would like to, since we only have 30 minutes left, to go right away into questions, comments from here in the room, and then for a discussion. Yeah, please.
I have a question. If I understood correctly from Paivi, the first speaker, she mentioned the domestic dimension on hybrid threats, but then some examples they were mentioning Nigeria, Philippines. So could you elaborate a bit on this domestic element you were mentioning, like prominent, if I understood correctly?
Thank you for your question. Yeah, so what I meant by domestic is that when we try to attribute the activities, then it's really hard to, if there are, hybrid actors, they can orchestrate the activities by themselves, or then they can use proxies. So proxies are actors who are acting behalf of their mastermind behind, so to say. And if those proxies they cover the trace so that it's impossible to attribute or draw the connection between the proxies and then the actual coordinator, it's really hard to distinguish the activities. I mean, what come from external, outside of the country, if we speak about a country here, and what is of domestic origin. Then next to proxies, there can be independent actors who don't have any connection with any external state or non-state actor. So just, for example, a group of extremists who want to challenge the democratic way of governing, for example, or want to question climate change, or want to undermine some public, really important debate. So you have basically three different kind of set of actors. So those external state actors, then proxies, which can receive money from external state actors, so they can be financed, or then they can be ideologically supporting a state actor, and then we have totally independent actors. Yeah, and that makes getting the right, accurate situation awareness of the picture really challenging.
Thank you. Thank you all speakers for a great insight. Starting also with Päivi, you mentioned that, if I well understood, you conducted exercises for politicians or the people from the political level. Could you say something more on that? What was the audience and what was the outcome of that? How was the reaction? Are they right now more conscious on the hybrid threat? Are you going to conduct a follow-on in other countries or in industrial or other organizations? Then, if I may, to others, for Lucas, if it's not a secret, what do you do with your data, with your findings? Do you share that your outcome of your researches with governments, or is it all every organization can request your support, and then you can come with your staff and conduct certain actions and then deliver certain recommendations or evidence? And then maybe for EAS colleagues, perhaps you know, do we think, we especially commission to provide certain requirements for media enterprise, for social media providers here in Europe? Of course, would be great to have it the same with Twitter or Facebook, to counter disinformation using artificial intelligence. Is that a discussion on that, perhaps? I think it's inevitable in a short or longer term of, if we have such information, just please share with them. Thank you.
Great question. Sorry if I didn't make it clear enough during the presentation, or usually I leave a link somewhere. The model of our work is that we share everything we find, and you can access all of our research www.medium.com/DFRlab, or just Google DFR Lab, and I think that's the first page that comes up. And if you want to find out more about us, go to digitalsherlocks.org, where you can find all the information about us, including all of our events. This year's, actually, I forgot to mention, this year's main flagship event that we do once per year is happening in Brussels in beginning of June. So everyone who's interested to learn more about what we do is welcome to join. I think it's June 4th and 5th in Brussels.
Thank you for your good question. So you asked about exercises. So what Hybrid COE does is, we are not actually a think tank. We like to call ourselves as do think. So we are mainly working with policy practitioners, meaning people working either at the national level in ministries, different ministries, MOD, MOI, MFA, Ministry of Education, Culture, you name it. Then international staff at NATO or here in the EU. And we have been asked to organize different kind of exercises, so mainly tabletop exercises. So we introduce a scenario. So you can use exercises as to test new ideas, test exercise response, or just kind of map problems which hamper or which are kind of preventing effective, for example, coordination. So it depends on what is the target audience. So we have organized several ones. For example, here in Brussels, 1.5 years ago, there was a tabletop exercise for BSc and NAC, that kind of a joint event. So it depends, it varies, and of course objectives are defined according to the audience.
And to your last question, this goes right into the heart of the ongoing policy debate. I'm speaking under the control of Paolo and the colleagues. Of course, we have started to tackle this with the code of practice. This is exactly which is being evaluated. You heard, I referred already to the, let's say, the presentation of the package of yesterday, which already kind of looked at 2 very important instruments that will also come out, the Digital Services Act, the Democracy Action Plan. So this is exactly the big question. How much and what type of, let's say, commitments or of obligations also the industry players, in particular the social media platforms, or the platforms have. And I think we can summarize them in 2 clusters. It's the question about transparency and about responsibility. How exactly, that is now the debate that we're having in the weeks to come. Of course, there are plenty of ideas already around. Also, I have to be fair to the platforms. They are doing quite a lot already, also in detecting, in investing. And what is also fair to say is that we all, both from policy side as much as from the industry side, are of course confronted with a very, very dynamic kind of environment. You talked about kind of changes that are coming up. We have seen a presentation very recently about the extremely quickly developing and more, let's say, the upscaling of these disinformation campaigns, not only from external actors. So the attribution gets more and more difficult. The tracing gets more and more difficult. You just spoke also in the first reply that you gave about leveraging more and more in local proxies, commercial entities that get involved. All this is a morphing kind of environment, which makes, of course, the job of designing kind of the right policy options quite difficult. I think that's, unless Paolo, you would like to add something to this, feel free.
Yes, I can add something just to put the debate in perspective and to perhaps draw your attention to the fact that there is a recent study from the Reuters Institute, which has just come out a couple of days ago, that further complicate, I think, our discussions. There are several findings. One, what interesting is looking at the news diet that UK voters have been following in the run-up of their own elections during December. You see, and what I have been observing is what type of online websites have been watched for news during the months of December. And the results now by memory is that 33% of the websites consulted were websites not endorsing any particular party, 31% were endorsing the Conservative Party, 12% the Labour Party, and then you have a plethora of smaller players and smaller outlets with RT totaling 1% of the views. But that is not all. What is really dramatic is that looking at the time spent by the voters in consuming news, well, do you know how much time has been spent on average by UK voters during that period per week? 16 minutes per week per voter. 16 minutes spent to get informed. And this information was coming on average from 22 different sources of information. So the diet is very diverse, but is very, very meager. Very meager. Which in fact raise a huge question, a bit connected with what you are saying, how media can actually support better information in an environment where people seem to be absorbing knowledge and information through different ways. the time spent on news on internet represents 3% of the time, overall time spent on using internet. So the way that we acquire knowledge and information, it is no longer reconductible to the traditional way that you consult websites. You know, there are different ways, and we need to understand them better, I think. In terms of attributions and whether foreign versus domestic actors comes into play, the study also revealed that according to the common perception, there is 35% of people thinking that the main purveyors of disinformation are the actual local politicians. And 14% is the figures that attributes that responsibility to the mainstream press, to the journalists themselves. 12% thinks that responsibility is incumbent on the users. And only 7% think that it is the result of deliberate foreign interference. So what I'm saying here, it is good, your work is excellent, it is absolutely the spotlight on the real threats. But at the same time, we have to understand that behind that iceberg, there is a mass of eyes that needs still to be understood and mapped. Actually, it's not a question, it's just a comment.
No, it's excellent. Can you just repeat the study for those who didn't, the name of the study?
The study is the Reuters Institute of the Oxford Universities and has been published the 5th of February. You can find it online.
Good. And what I suggest, maybe I'm looking at the colleagues of Connect University, maybe we can also put together a number of the most relevant links, maybe, because there is so much good material out there explaining this extremely complex issue, you know. Paolo now spoke about the media kind of element of this consumption, the information or media ecosystems behind, so quite a number of things. Are there other questions? Oh yeah, otherwise I have here 3 and 4 from Slido. Why don't we take those that are directed at somebody directly? Ruben, why do you think we have not seen deepfakes more often and more prominently used for disinformation? Is this, are there specific reasons? Are they too expensive, or are they more used already than we think?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it is still something that it's ongoing. There are some examples reported, for example, by Associated Press. I remember, for example, an image of a lady targeting people through LinkedIn. You know, so maybe in a way that it's more related to, you know, developing actives and sources and this kind of stuff. And not maybe so much related to videos. Of course, there are some prominent examples about, you know, that really shows you the potential of this technology. But probably it's because it's still, you know, not, you know, popular. Maybe there are some early adopters, let's say, but not, you know, the general population. It's allowed to create this kind of content yet. But I don't think we are too far from there, honestly.
I think also the platforms are developing devices at the moment that kind of try to use AI technology to detect altered and videos in particular, audiovisual material. The big question is also the one that I asked before, is what is faster, the forgery or the uncovering or discovering the forgery? That is the big question. There are more questions here, and since Paolo is also in the room, I will direct the question to you. Of course, I know the answer, but the question of civil society organizations here. And I think that is, can you see the question? What is the role of civil society organizations in counteracting of disinformation? And what financial resources does the Commission offer to gear them up? I think this is right down the EDMO and a few other things. Paolo, do you want to say a few words about this?
Start from the easier part of the question, which financial resources we are providing to the civil society organizations. The answer is easy, none. Is their role important in counteracting disinformation? The answer is clearly yes. We have had an example during the European elections, with Abbas playing quite an important role, a bit similar to the one that you are mentioning before, observing exactly and mapping the territory, the space, to understand how people were interacting on Facebook, on Twitter, and to complementing the work of fact-checkers, in essence. And also indicating threats, alerting when necessary. And that has been quite effective in a number of instances in a number of member states. What is the perspective? What we would like to do, what we are trying to do, is through a new structure, which will be called the European Digital Media Observatory, which we are in the process now to build up. In the first phase, it is in a selection stage to identify the consortium that will build up the first central platform. The timing is around March, end of March, for the identification and the selection of the consortium. This new structure should be able to link up actors that for the moment have been doing their work in a quite separate manner. The fact-checkers, the academic researchers, the civil society organizations. When I say fact-checkers, I include media in general because it's difficult to distinguish between standalone fact-checking organization and fact-checking department within media, within established outlets. So these three categories of actors will find a way to join forces within an infrastructure that will initially provide at the central level access to the platform's data for a much needed better view of what is going on in the space of social media and the space of online medias through a system that will preserve the privacy of the individual users by creating safe harbors and other systems like differential privacy, access to data that are safeguarding the privacy of each individual person that have contributed his own data to the platforms, while at the same time releasing data sets that are sufficiently robust from a statistical perspective for the research purposes. Secondly, it will have the role to steer and to coordinate research among hubs that will be built up in the second phase, research hubs that will be built up through a second installment of funding already this year, in the second half of this year, to create networks of research and fact-checkers and civil society organizations at the local level within regions. It's there where the research has to happen. It's there where the necessary knowledge about local information environments and exposure to possible threats, which varies very much in Europe from east to west, from north to south, has to come from. And with the coordination at the central level, there will be the possibility to enhance synergies, of course, but also to exchange information that may become very useful to move towards a real-time approach for responding to these information threats. There will be other functions, of course, in terms of keeping repositories, enabling public disclosure of disinformation stories or trends that have been identified. But in essence, that is what perhaps, and I hope, will make civil society organization lives easier in the future and their work more impactful in the future.
Thank you, Paolo. That's quite important to say that one of our objectives in the work is to strengthen societal resilience against disinformation. And that is by strengthening civil society actors also, because this cannot be just a government kind of work. And whatever we do, this always kind of plays in an organization like yours. I'm looking to the left in particular, since you work on the government side at the moment, are doing enormous work. I see that one of our Slido users, Camille, is very, very active. And he asked a question where I'm hesitating to take it, and I'll tell you why. Not that I don't want to answer the question, because the distinction between right-wing and left-wing disinformation is a misleading one. We spoke a lot about kind of one actor. We know from excellent studies that we should also put in the kind of collection of links how disinformation is used to polarize a society. So is this now right-wing or is it left-wing? It's just jumping on right-wing and left-wing issues to kind of polarize. That would be a little bit my answer to this, but I nevertheless let you, the panel, if, I don't know, Päivi, at some point the question came to you, if you have any, or Ruben, Lucas, any of you who wants to say something about this?
Well, maybe I can say some words on this. I think that you are absolutely right. This is really tricky, you know, speaking about right-wing or left-wing, because particularly external or disinformation from external actors, what they are trying to do is to divide our societies and try to make us think that, you know, everything is interpretable in terms of right or the left. Of course, we have certain particular topics that, might be used more in, radical right parties, narratives or whatever. But it's, I will try to avoid as well, to speak about the right or the left-wing disinformation. And the instruments are basically the same. You can have conspiracy theories. You can have particular historical cleavages that are exploited in these disinformation campaigns. For example, it's very easy to pick a topic that affects maybe two countries that might be members of the EU or whatever, and then try to say, okay, so this country made this in the past, and we should be, so look at the past and try to exploit, potential topics to confront, member countries or societies on the internal level. So I think it's avoiding this.
Any other thoughts?
I think you guys summed it up very well. I think both sides are using the same methods. It's just maybe that there's more attention in the society towards the radical right at the moment. But what we see in our election watch monitors that both sides are very much interested in providing a variety of conspiracy theories and informational attacks on the topics of their interests, and the same methods are being used. And as you correctly both mentioned, some external actors that are very keen to finance both sides equally and just to cause chaos in our societies.
Sorry, since it was mentioned how domestic actors are influencing the entire discussion too, and there are two things which I find particularly interesting, or which worries me quite a lot, is the fact that even in the Western countries, governments themselves, and yes, I'm speaking of America, of course, are constantly attacking media outlets that can be considered as factual and alleged. And that's the one thing that worries me. And the other one is the fact that quite a lot of media outlets are actually owned by one person or several persons who have a clear political agenda, and who also, in my opinion, spread a lot of false news, such as the Murdoch empire. I mean, as far as I know, Rupert Murdoch owns Fox News and many well-known British newspapers and so on. So this is a kind of disinformation that is directly in the West, and how can Europe respond to that?
Again, right into the heart of the policy debate. Although, of course, at the European level, let's say, media policy has its limits. Let's call it like this. Again, I'm looking to Paolo, but we have a number of, let's say, very clear aims and policies that aim at, let's say, support for quality journalism, support for quality media. Diversity, I think, is another kind of key principle that we have in mind. We have instruments for that. Is it kind of a wholly EU-level kind of owned policy. Certainly not. And that is exactly where the interplay and the cooperation between member states and the European level is so important. Paolo, do you want to add something? But I think that summarizes a little bit. It's, but of course, you know, we need to look at, if we look at information spaces, we need to look at all the different elements, and we get a very, very big picture. I think the difficult question that we are all facing, whether as, say, at the political level, at the more kind of at the level of officials or on the side of research of people who are there, is where is the line between legitimate and not legitimate, and how do we define this? And I'm specifically not saying illegal and legal, because that is a total different discussion. We have laws, we have clear kind of law enforcement, but here we speak about what do we do with a space where the information is, and I use a double negation, is not illegal. You know? And the debate that we're having at the moment is that you can look at the issue from three different aspects. Either you look at the content, which is a tricky exercise, but you also need to look at it. Whether you can regulate the content is a very different question. You can look at the actor, or you look at actor behavior, for example. And most likely you need all three elements, but you need very different approaches to all three elements. Sorry to be a little bit conceptual. Good. Camille is very happy for having answered his questions. Why is the demand for fake news? I think Paolo just answered very well, you know, that this is also a question of consumption behavior. This is also a question of what kind of upstream and downstream perspectives, you know. Disinformation is not only a question of those who produce it, but of course also those who consume it. And we need to look at both aspects there. Raimunda, of course. And then I would like to go for a quick round of conclusion. Why don't you start this already?
Well, I will start then by sort of referring to the demand of fake news. I don't think that there is a person who consciously wants to read the information that is not accurate, that consciously seeks disinformation, unless, of course, there's a policy objective. But I think the point here is that what is here called fake news, what we prefer to call disinformation, is that it exploits vulnerabilities wherever they might be, either, for example, in the platforms, you know, and how we get shown content, but also they tend to play and exploit our own biases. You might have noticed there's a lot now going on with the coronavirus, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories about this virus. Why? And because the topic is so fertile for conspiracy theories, because it's alarming, and there are a lot of anthropological and sociological studies which say that, you know, threat-based information spreads faster than any kind of other information. This is evolution. We want to know about threats. So this kind of thing is alarming, and people want to know. It's very scientifically complex. It's hard to explain. It's still unknown and evolving. A perfect ground for for spreading. So we must be aware of vulnerabilities, basically, both in the environment and also in how we ourselves consume information. For example, sensationalist news and so on and so forth. Thanks.
Do you want to say a few other words, kind of concluding?
Yes, and finally, and also a little bit coming back to the previous question, if I may, I think that it's very important. Of course, we may have concerns as citizens of democratic countries about the quality of our media environment, but I think there's very clear to always have this distinction in mind. And of course, I'm talking about the pro-Kremlin actors. There's no equivalence here, and maybe these actors would like to see, you know, for example, in RT-run channels, you can see a lot of critiques to corporate media, but it's an entirely different kind of beast when we talk about the pro-Kremlin media, and this is the thing that I also try to emphasize in my presentation, you know, where they directly state controlled, they don't want to be independent, they don't want to be impartial, and they use these are the tools basically in the hybrid toolkit. So I think it's very important to be conscious, as much as we may be critical of other types of media, it's very important to be conscious of that difference.
Thank you. Adding to the Raimonda's answer on cognitive biases or biases, then exactly why there is need for or demand for fake news. So if we think about cognitive bias, for example, then people tend to believe information which is reinforcing the worldview you are having, and therefore not only providing factual information to kind of fight with disinformation is not the only solution, or that people like to make shortcuts. So instead of focusing or taking a deeper look at complicated issues, people like more simple solutions, black and white, maybe framings, and that's exactly what fake news often are about. So playing cleverly with our cognitive biases is the problem. But as a concluding remark, I think we are living in kind of a new era. New technologies, social media have just appeared. They have been with us, or we have been living with those changes not many years, maybe 15 years or 2 decades. If we take a look at, if we go, for example, 80 years backwards, and we take examples of traffic. So the first highways were built, people started to have step-by-step more money to buy cars, and amount of traffic increased. There were a lot of accidents. Cars were not safe, not so safe as they are today. We didn't have seat belts and other safety equipments. We didn't have speed limits. Nowadays we do have them, and not so many people are getting killed in traffic accidents. Now we have this new technology, different tools, social media, and we are kind of in an information highway, overspeeding, not maybe very well get used with the recent changes. And now it takes time for us to kind of adapt and adjust to the new environment, and that's why we are struggling with versatile problems.
Thank you, Päivi. Ruben, last thought?
Some last thoughts. First, I would like to say that we still need, a strong, pluralistic, independent media. That we need to have, transparency on their sources of funding, of these media. If they are state-owned or they are private, we need to tell the public about this. We need to separate what is news, stories, and what is opinion, and they should tell their readership or their audience when they are exposed to opinions or when they are exposed to information and facts. And also, I think that we need to develop the confidence in the audience, give them the tools through education, training, and how to detect, false content, disinformation. But at the same time, avoid them being too overconfident, because, with the new technologies, the new tools in the future, that might become a problem. So try to find the balance is difficult, but I think that we can work on those lines.
Thank you, Ruben. Lucas?
Yeah, I would also like to make my final notes slightly optimistic. I think that what we're talking about now are short-term solutions to the problem we have, but the long-term solution, in my opinion, is media literacy. So basically, we should invest more time and effort and money into educating the young generation and everyone basically in this digital resilience on how to look into news, how to look into information, how to develop some sort of critical thinking. And I think the DFR Lab invests quite a lot of time into this. For example, next month I'm personally going back to Lithuania, and we're going to visit a few schools and talk with students in between 9 and 12 grade on how to just look into news and disinformation and information itself. And I think this is the long-term solution. And I think there are so many organizations and there are so many civil society members that would like to do this job for us and for the governments. And I'm not even sure that the government has to play a very big role in this and just has to empower the people who can solve it for them.
Then I would like to close, and there is actually kind of a new question about Maidan. I suggest, why don't you contact Raimonda and Lucas, who will be able to give you all the answers. But about the legislative proposals, that's a nice kind of closing. Whether there will be legislative proposals, we don't know how they will look like. In any case, there will be policy initiatives coming up. They have been announced yesterday already. We're building on a good kind of approach already that we have developed, and I think we can be, as Europeans, we can be quite proud of this because it is a very kind of logical and multifaceted kind of toolbox that we have been, or that we are creating, combining very different elements that I mentioned in the beginning and that also Lucas talked about, where we need to think big. Let me say a big, big thank you to all four of you in particular, to all of you who came here, to all of you who are watching or have been watching this, and of course to Andrea and the colleagues and Sabrina who have been organizing this panel, and I think an issue that will follow us in quite some intensity for a lot of time or a long time still. Thank you very much.